The wind moved gently across the wide plains, carrying with it the smell of earth and distant smoke, whispering stories of lives lived before. Out on that open land, beneath a sky so endless it seemed to swallow everything, a man walked slowly, his steps heavy but steady. At his side, a small child clung to his hand, her eyes wide with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. They carried little with them, just a worn blanket, a few tools, and the weight of being unwanted. The man had been banished from his people, cast away with no promise of return, no voice left to plead for mercy. He did not look back because there was nothing behind him but shame and silence. Ahead, there was only uncertainty. For days they moved through the grasslands, the child stumbling at times, her tiny legs trying to keep up. She would look up at him, searching his face for comfort, and though his lips rarely curved into a smile, his grip never loosened. He had been stripped of honor, but not of duty. She was all he had left, and he would not fail her. The nights were cold, the stars cruel in their distance, and the child sometimes cried softly into the crook of her arm. He would wrap her in the blanket, whispering old songs under his breath, songs once sung at fires. He could never again sit beside Dot. It was on one of these weary mornings, when hunger gnawed at their bellies and the man's spirit bent low, that their path crossed with hers. She was not of his people, though her heart carried a strength that needed no tribe to name it. From the edge of her small homestead, she had seen them first, the tall, weather-worn man and the little girl clutching his side like a fragile bird. Something in her stirred then, something that would not let her turn away. She stepped forward, her eyes soft yet unwavering, as though she had already decided what the outcome must be. The man hesitated, pulling the child slightly behind him. He knew what most would see in him, a stranger, an outcast, someone to be avoided. He had grown used to wary glances and doors closed in his face. But this woman did not flinch. She did not scorn or demand explanation. Instead, she looked at the girl, then at him, as if weighing a silent truth. In that moment, her choice was made. She opened her heart. She offered them warmth, food, and the smallest glimmer of something he had long believed lost a chance. But taking that chance would not be simple. The man carried shadows on his back, the weight of past wrongs and the danger of being hunted. By memory, the woman, too, risked much. Her neighbors would question her. Her own standing could suffer. And yet, when she set her hand on the child's shoulder, she felt a pull stronger than fear. The little girl looked up at her with eyes that seemed to ask, "Can we stay?" Still, nothing was certain. Each day brought new tests, new whispers, and new reminders that kindness often comes at a cost. The man, though grateful, could not shake his unease. What if their presence brought harm to the woman who had shown them mercy? What if the past found them here, tearing apart the fragile threads of trust they were only beginning to weave? The wind carried questions that had no answers yet. The wide plains stretched on, holding secrets in their silence. And as the sun dipped behind the hills that night, the child lay safe for the first time in weeks, her small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The man kept watch, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, while the woman prepared. For what she knew was only the beginning, because this story was not yet about peace. It was about survival, about second chances, and about the power of one choice that could change everything. And just as hope began to flicker in the quiet corners of their lives, a sound rose from the distant hoofbeats cutting through the pidikem, through the night air, growing louder with every breath. The question was no longer whether the man and his child had found shelter. The question was whether shelter could stand against the storm that was coming. The sound of hoofbeats echoed against the night sky, steady and unrelenting, like a drumbeat calling trouble closer. The man rose quietly from where he sat near the Fire, his hand instinctively reaching for the small blade he carried. It was not much of a weapon, but it was all he had. His daughter stirred in her sleep, the flames casting flickering shadows over her face. He looked down at her, then toward the woman who had offered them shelter. She, too, had heard it. Her hands paused over the pot she had been stirring, her eyes lifting toward the darkness beyond the glow of firelight. Neither spoke. Words were not needed. Danger had a way of announcing itself without explanation. The hoofbeats drew nearer, but then faded to the side, as though skirting the edges of the homestead rather than riding directly into it. Still, unease lingered long after the sound disappeared into the distance. The night felt heavier, and sleep came slowly. If at all by morning, the child woke refreshed, unaware of the tension that had wrapped around the grown-ups like a binding rope. She laughed softly as she found a piece of bread waiting for her, torn from the loaf the woman had baked. Her small hands clutched it with delight, and for the first time in many days, she ate without fear that the food would run out. The man watched her silently, his heart tight with gratitude but also with guilt. He had not been able to give her this. Another had done it, and though he was thankful, it deepened the ache of his failures. The woman moved with quiet purpose, tending to her animals, drawing water, preparing for the day's chores. She did not ask him for his story, not yet. She understood something without being told. A man banished from his people carried scars not easily revealed. Instead, she let the silence breathe between them, only breaking it with small kindnesses. Meal shared, a blanket folded, a place by the fire left open. Still, the man could not rest. He knew the rules of the world beyond kindness. An outcast was marked. His presence here could bring suspicion, even danger, upon her. He thought of leaving, of gathering his daughter in his arms and moving on before anyone could notice. But each time he looked at the child, content in her play, he hesitated. Where else could they go? How many more nights of cold ground, of empty bellies, could she endure? As the day stretched on, the woman finally spoke of her own life, not as an invitation for pity, but as a thread woven carefully into the silence. She told him how she had come to this place alone after losing much, how the land had become both her refuge and her test. She worked it with her hands, and though it was not easy, it had given her a sense of purpose. Out here, she said softly, there is no one to tell me who I must be. I decide that for myself. Her words lingered in the air, simple yet strong, and he felt something stir inside him. But even as her voice soothed, the man's mind returned to the hoofbeats. Riders did not come this way by chance. Perhaps they were only passing through, but he knew better than to trust in coincidence. He remembered the faces of those who had judged him, the fire of anger in their eyes, the certainty with which they had cast him out. Could they still be watching? Could they still be hunting? The child, unaware of her father's thoughts, wandered. Near the corral, giggling as the woman's horse snorted and tossed its head. Her laughter was bright, unburdened, like a song carried by the wind. The woman smiled faintly at the sound, though the man's gaze remained shadowed. He could not bring himself to believe such moments would last. Happiness was fragile, and for men like him, it rarely stayed. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the prairie grasses turned gold, the woman prepared another meal. She hummed quietly to herself, a tune that carried the rhythm of long days and the comfort of habit. The man listened, the sound both foreign and familiar, pulling at memories of songs once sung by his people. He felt the ache of distance, not only from the land he had left, but from the belonging he had once known. He had been many things, a son, a brother, a warrior, but now he was only a wanderer with a child to protect. When darkness returned, he did not sleep. He sat near the door, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the blackness beyond. Every creak of wood, every rustle in the grass, sharpened his senses. He thought again of the riders. Were they scouts? Did they carry news? Or, worse, did they carry orders? He kept his blade close, though he knew it would do little against a determined hand. Still, he would not be caught unprepared. The woman woke once during the night and saw him there, silent and rigid, his face carved with worry. She said nothing, only left a small blanket beside him before returning to her rest. Her gesture did not go unnoticed. He touched the fabric lightly, the warmth of it strange against the coldness that had settled in his bones. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. The child played freely, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. The man helped where he could, gathering wood, mending small things, keeping watch. The woman never asked for his story, but her presence seemed to invite it all the same. He found himself speaking little pieces here and there, not the whole truth, but fragments that hinted at what had been lost. He spoke of fires at night, of songs rising into the stars, of battles fought and mistakes made. His voice would trail off before he revealed too much, but even fragments carried weight. Yet even within this fragile calm, shadows grew. Whispers began to circle in nearby settlements. People had seen a stranger, tall and dark-eyed, walking the plains with a child. Some wondered who he was, others warned against him. Outcasts carried reputations that followed like smoke. The woman knew this, and though she tried to shield her home with silence, she could not silence the world beyond. One evening, when the sky turned storm-gray and winds began to stir, she looked at him with a question unspoken but clear in her eyes. Was he ready to tell her the truth? Could she trust that whatever past followed him would not burn her home to the ground? He met her gaze, and for a long time, neither looked away. The child, unaware of the weight between them, played at their feet with sticks and stones, humming to herself. The storm broke with sudden force, rain lashing the earth, thunder rolling across the land. They moved quickly to bring the animals inside to secure what they could. Lightning split the sky, lighting the man's face in sharp lines of determination. In that moment, the woman saw not just the burden of an outcast, but the strength of someone who had endured far more than most could imagine. She saw a father who would stand against anything for his child, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one still waiting beyond the horizon. Riders would return. Questions would rise. And choices would have to be made, choices that could not be undone. As the rain hammered against the roof and the fire crackled low, the child curled against her father, her small hand clutching his arm. He held her close, his eyes staring into the flames as if trying to see what lay ahead. The woman sat across from him, her expression steady. Though her heart raced with questions. Outside, the wind carried more than rain. It carried voices, faint but sharp, cutting through the storm. Whether they were real or only born of his restless mind, the man could not yet know. But one thing was certain: shelter, no matter how kind, could not hold back the weight of a past that was not finished with him. And as the storm raged on, the hoofbeats returned, faint at first but growing louder, as though the night itself had decided their peace was already over. The hoofbeats did not vanish this time. They pressed closer, breaking through the storm like thunder with purpose of its own. The man rose quietly, his body tense, his hand reaching for the small blade, though he knew it would not be enough. The woman, steady though her breath caught, moved to shield the child, her body bending as if instinct alone told her what to do. The fire inside flickered low, its light no match for the pounding rhythm drawing near. The night was no longer just wind and rain. It was filled with expectation, with the sharp edge of something about to change. The horses slowed, circling the homestead, their shadows tall against flashes of lightning. Voices followed, muffled by the storm but growing clearer with each pass. The man's chest tightened. He recognized the tones, if not the exact words. It was the language of suspicion, the voice of men searching for answers they had already decided upon. He glanced at the woman, but she did not flinch. She held her place by the fire, her eyes fixed on the child's sleeping face. It was as if she had decided long ago that fear would not rule her, not even now. When the voices drifted away, swallowed by the storm, the silence that followed was heavier than before. The man did not sit. He paced the room, each step a battle between leaving and staying. His mind returned to the day he had been banished. He remembered the firelight on the faces of his people, the sharp judgment cast down like a blade. He had not been given a chance to defend himself, not truly. And now, though distance separated him from that place, the judgment still chased him, carried by whispers and suspicion. The woman finally spoke. "You cannot keep running forever," she said quietly, her words almost lost to the rain. "They will find you no matter where you go. The question is, what will you do when they do?" Her voice did not accuse, but it pressed into him all the same. He had no answer. His eyes dropped to the child curled in sleep, her small form unaware of the world's weight. His heart told him to flee, but something deeper held him there, tethered to the fragile shelter they had been given. In the days that followed, the storm passed, but the unease did not. The man kept close to the homestead, his eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting riders at any moment. The woman went about her work as usual, though he noticed the way she lingered longer at the door, her gaze stretching farther than before. Neither spoke of leaving, but both knew the time for decision was near. It was during one of these tense days that a new threat of conflict quietly appeared. A neighbor arrived, a man from the nearest settlement, carrying with him not only supplies, but curiosity. He greeted the woman with a practiced smile, but his eyes darted toward the tall stranger by the fence. The man kept his distance, his face unreadable, but his presence was enough to raise questions. The neighbor asked too many, his tone light but edged. Who was this stranger? Why had she taken him in? What did she know of his past? The woman answered carefully, offering little, but the weight of his suspicion clung to the air long after. He had gone. The child sensed the shift too, though she could not name it. She grew quieter, watching her father with wide eyes, clinging closer to him when footsteps echoed near. At night, she asked small questions in a whisper. Are we safe here? Will they take us away? The man held her close, his voice steady though his heart trembled. He told her they would not be parted, but even as the words left his lips, he knew promises were fragile things. The woman began to carry her own quiet burden. By opening her door to them, she had stepped into a storm she could not yet see the full shape of. The neighbor's visit had made clear what she already knew: kindness carried a cost. Rumors would spread, and with them would come pressure, maybe even anger. Yet when she looked at the child, she felt her choice confirmed again and again. The little girl's smile was worth every whisper. But choices born of the heart rarely shield one from the world's judgment. One evening, as the man worked to mend part of the fence, the woman approached him with words she had been holding back. You should tell me the truth, she said. Her voice was calm, but firm. Not the whole of it, if it is too heavy, but enough so I know what we are standing against. He looked at her, the weight of years pressing down in his silence. Finally, he began to speak. He told her not of every detail, but of betrayal, of how a single act one misunderstood, twisted by others, had marked him as dangerous, unworthy, untouchable. He told her of the council fire, of the voices raised against him, of the way he had been driven out with nothing but his child in his arms. He did not ask for her pity. He only gave her the truth as he had lived it, raw and incomplete. She listened. Without interruption, her eyes steady on him, her breath quiet. When he finished, she said only, "Then you must stand here, not as an outcast, but as a father. That is what they cannot take from you." Her words settled into him, though he could not yet believe them fully. Still, they offered something, a small light in the gathering dark. But peace was not theirs to claim. The riders returned again, this time by daylight. From a distance, their figures stood clear against the horizon, watching the homestead with a stillness that carried warning. They did not approach, but their presence was louder than any words. The man tensed, his hand finding the hilt of his blade, though he made no move forward. The woman stood beside him, her arms folded, her expression calm but defiant. The child clung to her father's leg, her small body pressed into him for safety. The riders lingered, then turned away, their departure no less unsettling than their arrival. They had seen, they had marked, and they would be back. As night fell. Once more the man sat awake, the fire low at his side. The woman rested nearby, though not fully asleep, her breathing shallow. The child, exhausted by fear she could not name, finally drifted into dreams. Beyond the walls, the plains stretched endless, hiding threats in every shadow. The man knew that choices would soon press against him harder than ever. To stay was to invite danger closer. To leave was to strip his child of the first safety she had known in weeks. The fire cracked, the sound sharp in the silence. He stared into it, seeing shapes that were not their faces of those who had cast him out. The eyes of riders circling like wolves, the flicker of a life that could never quite be grasped. His grip tightened on the blade resting across his lap. Somewhere beyond the dark, the hoofbeats would come again, and when they did, he would have to decide what kind of man he truly was, the banished or the father who refused to be broken. Days that followed grew heavier, as if the air itself carried the weight of what was coming. The man felt it in every breath, in every sound that broke the silence of the plains. Even the child, once bright with laughter, grew quieter, her eyes often searching the horizon as though she too could sense danger waiting just beyond sight. The woman kept her calm, her movements steady, her voice unshaken, but the man could see the tension beneath her stillness. She was preparing herself, though she did not say it aloud. The riders did not return right away, but their absence was not a comfort. It was worse in a way, for it meant they were waiting, watching, gathering strength. The neighbor's visits grew more frequent as well, his words sharper, his tone edged with questions that cut deeper than before. Each time he came, his eyes lingered on the man as though trying to unravel him with a stare. He spoke of the settlement, of how people were talking, of how rumors spread faster than the wind. He warned the woman that her kindness could cost her everything. His voice carried a mix of concern and something else, something that smelled of suspicion and quiet threat. The man bore it in silence, but inside he burned. Every whisper, every glance, every unspoken accusation pressed down on him like the weight of the banishment all over again. He could endure it alone, but not with his daughter caught in its shadow. Each night, he told himself to leave before the storm broke, and each morning he stayed, unable to pull her from the one place that felt like a home. Then one afternoon, the tension cracked open. The riders returned, not as distant figures on the horizon, but as a line of horsemen moving steadily toward the homestead. Their presence was deliberate, their pace slow but certain, as though they wanted their approach to be seen and felt long before they arrived. The woman stepped from her doorway, her face calm, though her hands gripped her apron tightly. The child stood behind her father, her small fingers clutching at his leg. The riders stopped just beyond the fence. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with eyes sharp as flint, raised his voice. He spoke not to the woman but to the man. His words carried judgment, laced with the authority of one who believed himself above question. He called him out for what he was, an exile, a man stripped of honor, one who had no place here. His voice rang across the land like a sentence already decided. He demanded the man leave to take the child and vanish, or else face the consequences. Woman's eyes flashed, and for the first time she stepped forward. Her voice, though softer, cut through the heavy air. She told them the man was her guest, that this was her land, and that no one had the right to decide who she offered shelter. 2. Her words carried strength, but the riders only laughed, the sound cruel against the open plains. Their leader turned his gaze back to the man, dismissing her defiance as though it meant nothing. The man felt the old fire rise in him, the same fire that had burned the night he was cast out. But now it was not only his pride at stake. His daughter's wide, frightened eyes reminded him that every choice he made would shape her fate. He stood taller, his hand resting on the small blade at his side, his gaze locked with the riders. He said nothing, but the silence itself was its own defiance. The riders did not press further that day, but the message was clear. They turned their horses and rode off, their laughter carrying in the wind long after they were gone. The woman released the breath she had been holding, her shoulders heavy, her face pale. The child buried her face into her father's leg, trembling. The man bent low, holding her close, his own heart thundering like the storm he knew was on its way. That night, the homestead did not rest. The woman moved through the rooms as though checking every corner for safety, her candlelight flickering against the walls. The man sat by the door, blade in hand, his ears straining for any sound. The child slept fitfully, waking at every crack of wood or whisper of wind. The storm was no longer in the distance. It had arrived, and it was only a matter of time before it broke fully upon them. The next day, the neighbor returned again, but this time his manner was sharper, his voice carrying the echo of the writer's judgment. He warned her that the settlement was speaking against her, that people believed she had endangered them all by harboring the banished man. His words cut like knives, planting seeds of doubt where there had been only quiet resolve. The woman stood her ground, but when he left, she lingered at the window, her face tight with worry. The man saw it, though she tried to hide it, and it tore at him more than the writer's threats. Every hour after, the air grew tighter, the silence sharper. The man began to sense eyes on him even when no one was there. He felt the plains closing in, the walls of the homestead shrinking, as if nowhere could keep them safe anymore. The woman, though steady in her actions, began to prepare quietly, setting aside food, water, things that could be carried quickly if needed. She did not speak of leaving, but her hands told him she was readying for it. On the third night, it happened. The hoofbeats returned, but this time they did not circle or stop. They thundered straight for the homestead, fierce and unrelenting, breaking the silence with violent certainty. The child jolted awake, her cry cutting through the night. The woman moved to her side, pulling her close, while the man rose to his full height, his blade gleaming faintly in the firelight. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed the very earth shook beneath it. The fire inside flickered, shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Outside, the horses snorted, their riders shouting, their voices laced with anger and certainty. They had come not to warn this time, but to take. The man's pulse raced, his breath steady but sharp. He looked once at the woman, then at his daughter, her small face pressed into the woman's chest, her eyes filled with terror. His grip on the blade tightened, his body coiled like a storm about to break. The riders dismounted. Boots struck the earth outside, heavy and purposeful. Their shadows stretched long across the walls as they moved toward the door. The air inside grew thick, each heartbeat louder than the last. The woman held the child tighter, whispering words of comfort, though her own voice trembled. The man stepped forward, placing himself between them and the door, his stance unyielding. The pounding came, fists striking wood, voices demanding. The man's breath caught, but he did not move. Every part of him screamed to fight, to protect, to hold the line no matter the cost. The woman's eyes met his, steady but filled with fear, and in that gaze was an unspoken truth. Whatever happened next would change everything. The pounding grew louder, the shouts more violent. The blade in his hand caught the light, trembling slightly in his grip. The child whimpered, the sound cutting through the chaos like a knife to the heart. The man's eyes narrowed, his body bracing for what was about to come. And then silence. The kind of silence that carries the weight of a storm just before it breaks. The silence held for a breath that felt endless. The fists on the door stilled, and outside the storm of voices cut off as if the riders themselves were waiting for the man's choice. His grip on the blade tightened until his knuckles burned. His body ready for the fight he knew might be his last. But in that moment, when the child whimpered softly against the woman's chest, something inside him shifted. His rage, his pride, all the years of anger at being cast out, none of it mattered more than her safety. He was not only a banished man. He was a father, and that truth weighed heavier than steel. The door shuddered under another blow, then swung wide, the wood groaning as it gave way. Figures filled the frame, shadows against the dim firelight, faces hard with judgment. Their leader stepped forward, his voice sharp as flint. He called the man what he had always been called: outcast, danger, shame. He declared that the child did not belong with him, that she would be taken away to be raised properly. The words struck like arrows, and for an instant the man's vision blurred with fury. He lifted the blade, his muscles taut, ready to meet them with all he had. But before he could move, the woman stepped between them. Her voice rose, calm but unshakable, carrying across the room with a strength that surprised even him. She said this was her home, her land, her choice. She told them they had no right to take what was not theirs. Her words cut through the air like a bell in a storm. The riders shifted, uneasy at her defiance. They had expected the man's resistance, but not hers. The leader sneered, his hand falling to the weapon at his side. "You will lose everything," he warned her. But she did not flinch. She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. "I have already lost enough," she answered. "What I have now I will not surrender to fear." For a moment, no one moved. The fire crackled, the rain dripped from the eaves, the child's breath came in quick, frightened gasps. The man lowered his blade slightly, not in surrender, but in recognition. He saw in her what he himself had forgotten: courage that did not need to roar, only to stand firm. The riders shifted again, muttering among themselves. Some looked uneasy, glancing at one another as though questioning if this fight was worth what it might cost. The leader's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched, but even he seemed to hesitate. Perhaps it was the woman's voice, or the child's trembling frame clutched so tightly in her arms. Perhaps it was the silent strength in the man's stance, his eyes promising he would not stop until his last breath died at last. The leader spat into the dirt, his anger bitter but restrained. "Then keep your exile," he said coldly. "But do not forget you bring danger to yourselves by sheltering him." With that, he turned sharply, mounting his horse in one swift motion. The others followed, some with reluctance, others with a last glare. Their hoofbeats faded into the night, leaving behind only silence once more. The man stood frozen, the blade still in his hand, as though expecting them to return. But the quiet held. Slowly he lowered the weapon, his breath ragged in his chest. The woman exhaled too, though her arms did not release the child until the trembling stopped. That night, none of them slept. The man sat by the dying fire, his thoughts heavy. He knew the danger was not gone. The riders could return at any time, and the settlement would not forget. But something had changed. For the first time since his banishment, he had not been alone in standing against the weight of judgment. Someone had chosen to stand with him. In the days that followed, the air remained tense, but life continued. The man worked harder than before, fixing fences, hauling water, ensuring the homestead was strong against any threat. The woman went about her tasks with quiet resolve, though her eyes often strayed to the horizon. The child slowly began to smile again, though her laughter was softer, cautious, as if she still listened for hoofbeats in the distance. The neighbor came once more, but his tone had changed. He looked at the woman with something like disappointment, perhaps even fear. He told her the settlement had spoken against her, that her choice had cast suspicion on her too. But his voice lacked the sharpness of before, as if even he no longer knew how far to press. She listened politely, then turned away, her answer unspoken but clear. Her choice remained. The man considered leaving again, many times. He weighed the risks each night as the fire burned low. But each time he looked at his daughter, content in her small corner of safety, and each time he saw the woman's steady eyes, he stayed. Perhaps danger would always follow him, but perhaps too there could be strength in facing it together rather than alone. As the seasons turned, whispers from the settlement began to fade. Suspicion dulled into silence, and silence into acceptance. The riders did not return. Perhaps they had decided their warning was enough, or perhaps they had found another cause to chase. Whatever the reason, the homestead grew quiet again. Life settled into its rhythms, hard work, shared meals, laughter that slowly returned like spring after winter. The man never forgot the night of pounding fists and shouted threats. He knew that the world beyond their small circle could turn against them at any moment. But he also knew something he had not known before. He was more than his banishment. He was a father, and his daughter's safety was not built on running but on standing firm. The woman, too, carried her own quiet truth. She had chosen once to open her heart to strangers, and in doing so, she had gained something greater than safety. She had gained family, though no blood tied them. In the quiet evenings, when the child laughed by the fire and the man finally allowed a small smile to touch his lips, she felt the weight of her choice settle not as a burden but as a gift. Years later, when the child grew strong enough to run across the fields with laughter ringing clear, the man often stood at the edge of the homestead, watching her. He carried his past still, its scars etched deep, but he no longer let it define him. The plains stretched wide before him, endless and uncertain, but for the first time he did not fear them. He had found a place to belong, not through forgiveness from those who cast him out, but through the courage of one woman who had refused to turn him away. The story of the banished Lakota and his child was not one of defeat, nor one of easy peace. It was a story of survival, of trust built in fragile moments, of courage that grew in the face of judgment. It was a story that proved how a single act of kindness could change the course of lives, not by erasing the past, but by giving the future a chance to bloom. And when the child, now older, once asked her father why they had stayed in this place, his answer was simple. He looked at her, then at the woman tending the fire, and said, "Because here, someone believed in us when no one else would. And that is worth more than all the world's judgments." The plains still whispered with the wind, carrying echoes of hoofbeats long gone. But within the walls of the small homestead, there was warmth, there was laughter, and there was something even greater, hope. And so, the story closed not with exile, but with belonging. Not with fear, but with the quiet power of a heart that had once opened its door and never let it close again.